Welcome. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and thank you for joining us. I am your host, Daniel Davis. Many times as we approach midlife, we find ourselves in long-term relationships, perhaps 10, 15, 20, even in some cases 30 years. That is a long time to be with someone, and when it comes time that perhaps there's an illness that befalls our loved one, we kind of wonder, where do we kind of affirm our lives? What do we do? And in their passing, what is the next step that we take? These are moments that we find ourselves in the abyss. We kind of wonder, has anybody else ever been through a circumstance or a situation such as this? And what do? You feel isolated, even alone. People you know that love you, very good friends, family, try to reach out and see what they can do, but sometimes they even feel helpless. Well, it is all a process after all, and many people before you have been through the same situation, but sometimes you don't feel like they have. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is one of those such stories. In a book simply titled A Journey Well Taken, a woman talks about her life after the loss of her husband, where she was the caretaker when he befell an illness, and talks about the process that she followed through, the emotional healing, and sometimes the confusion that one feels in a situation such as this. And I think we like to bring these stories here to the Beyond 50 radio program today to help reach out to others who sometimes feel that sense of isolation, of being alone, of even the confusion that comes with it when you have a loss such as this. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is the author of A Journey Well Taken, Life After Loss. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is Elaine Williams. And Elaine, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Daniel. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Very good. Now, tell us your story and exactly what had happened.
Well, my husband and I had been together 23 years. We were married 20 years. He was always relatively healthy. In fact, he kind of shunned going to doctors. But suddenly one day he was having trouble eating, and he kept vomiting. And at first, you're kind of clueless, I guess, and you're like, okay, well, maybe, there's a stomach bug or something. But so what we did was we went to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, let's do an endoscopy. Let's make sure there's no obstructions, whatever. So end result was the doctor says there's some kind of lesion there. We have to have it looked at. He wanted us to go to a specialist, a gastroenterologist. So we, again, we're still, things hit you and you never think, okay, that can happen to me. But what ended up happening was we found out it was esophagus cancer. And what was so strange was to go from being healthy one day to the next week, you suddenly can't eat. He lost 12 pounds the first week, and then within 2 weeks he had lost 22 pounds. And we started going to doctors, and the gastroenterologist said, well, this is cancerous, and these are your options. So it's kind of like, going down a road and suddenly running into a wall and hitting it face first, and you're just so totally confused. And from there on, our life became a focus of trying to searching out options to make my husband become well again, which unfortunately with esophagus cancer, usually it's not discovered until near the end stage because a lot of times there are no symptoms. We were, starting a whole new phase of our life, and all our focus just became his illness.
Mm-hmm. I find, Elaine, it's very interesting in many shows that we have done that here when we talk about approaching midlife, this is the time where you finally start feeling like there's a sense of that open ground, especially as the kids are beginning to leave the house and you start planning about those things because now you have more time. And so when something like this happens, it's like, I'm sure you must have felt like a sense like somehow the two of you were cheated.
Well, my husband, he had been retired about 18 months. He'd worked hard his whole life. He was looking forward to retirement. Not that he was going to be sitting out on the veranda all the time. He loved sitting in the sun, but he was a person who was always busy doing this, doing that. He liked puttering up in the barn. and working on machines and different stuff, So he had like kind of a loose plan in place, and then to suddenly find out all that went by the wayside. It was just like all thrown away, taken away. And yeah, you do kind of, I'm sure he must have felt cheated. And of course, I felt cheated myself, but then I felt worse for my kids because my one son was 10 when he was diagnosed, and my other son was 17, and my other two boys were 17 and 18. So I felt cheated that in the end result, my kids lost their father when I felt they really needed him the most. The mother, they're growing up, they're younger, the mother nurtures, and I was lucky enough to be able to stay home with my kids. But then when they get to an age, they're getting into their teens, they're nearing 20, they really need, three boys I felt really needed their father the most at this time, and that was pulled away from them.
And I'm sure that also as this was happening, and you were thinking along those lines as you were just describing, there's that sense of loss of power, like you're helpless, like, what do I do? How do I deal with this? I don't remember anybody ever showing me any kind of a blueprint or even a book for that matter. What's my step? And that's where you began, I'm sure you probably felt this tremendous energy drain and confusion as to what do I do?
Yeah, especially given the fact that I'm a person who likes to take charge and not only make things happen, but make sure I'm very family oriented and make sure that things go well with my family. Mm-hmm. And you're totally helpless. You're relying on what the doctors are telling you. You're relying on the professionals, the people in the know. And ultimately, we decided to veer off of that path, and we kind of like straddled two worlds. We went with the regular medicine, but we also went with alternative medicine because my husband felt that if he went for the chemo and radiation, which is the traditional route, he felt that he would be dead within a month or two. Mm-hmm. And since he had that conviction, I wanted to support him, and I said to him, well, let's find out what else is out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really quite fantastic because many times on our program we've found that people have started exploring those alternative routes, and not just simply in the healing process physically, but also the emotional ones. And what sort of things did you come across, say, along those lines of emotional healing?
Well, instead of being, doing the doctor appointment where each time they go, you're going along and they say, okay, this is what we're going to do. What we were doing with the alternative was in conjunction with our alternative med doctor, and we had, several regular allopathic doctors also, but we were searching out different avenues that might help my husband. I mean, we weren't trying to just get him along. We were in the hope that somehow he would be cured of this cancer. So we had some kind of power in that I was aggressively doing research on the different methods that are out there. I mean, there's all kinds of teas and whatnot, herbal remedies. But ultimately, we felt like we had some kind of say in his treatment because we could try these different things that, of course, some people have had luck with and others have not. But again, with the esophagus cancer, the fact that you can't eat, that's against you from the beginning.
Right.
I mean, it's one thing if you have say breast cancer and you can change your diet dramatically, maybe go into a more raw diet or a greener diet. But he had different procedures where he could eat for perhaps another 7 weeks. He had different stents put in the esophagus to keep it open. But ultimately that failed too because of where he had the tumors. So it was kind of a losing battle. But, we just kept plugging on and just hoping that things would somehow work out.
I know that as you described in your book, this was a time that went for about 11 months. Is that true?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. And that is a long time. And for anybody to caretake of somebody that you almost feel like, there's nothing I can do. I just wish there was. I wished I could be in your place, for instance. And I know that at least came through me in a situation that I was in. If I could trade places with you right now, I could. And then, but you can't, and it's like, what is the next step from here? And did you ever find yourself at that time, as you were caring for your husband, thinking to yourself, and maybe it sounds selfish, of the things that you wished you would have done together that you probably won't have been able to do now?
You know, I can honestly say that didn't enter my mind, only because when you are in that, when I was in that mode, that caretaking mode, my mind was so filled with the research aspect and making sure he got his supplements and just the daily life. It was like I was so focused, and then making sure my kids were taken care of. Everything was just so focused on that, I didn't have room for this other stuff, I guess you'd say. Hello?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
So you didn't have time for this other stuff as you were describing?
No, my mind didn't have time to think about other things. It was so focused on his care.
Now, what was it like for your boys? Their involvement, questions that were being asked, what was their whole experience with this?
We tried to keep the kids abreast of what was going on and we were very honest and upfront with them without trying to scare them. I don't know how, it was a fine balance. But we wanted them to know exactly what was going on. We didn't want anything hidden from them because we didn't, we live in a small town. People are concerned, and, this one might say something that I wanted the kids to hear it from us and know the prognosis and what was going on that we knew to the best of our, current knowledge. So what would happen was we told the kids, if you have any questions, please ask us. Come to us if you have any concerns. And they used to, my two older ones were driving, and they used to pick up different things, supplements, sometimes prescriptions at the drugstore. They were very supportive, and they were very aware, I guess, if they went somewhere. And I tried to my husband and I tried to keep things as normal as possible because we didn't want the kids, even though they knew this was going on and they were involved, we didn't want to, take their life away from them during this time. But even though, they went out socially or whatever, they always said before they went out or on the way home, is there anything you need? They'd call and say, do you need anything at the store, whatever. So they were very supportive in that way. And they didn't ask a lot of questions. I don't know if it was because we kept them up to date on everything, or maybe they were just afraid to ask questions and to know any more in depth than what we could tell them. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. For those just tuning in, we're talking with Elaine Williams. She is author of a book, A Journey Well Taken, Life After Loss. Elaine, it's interesting. A couple of things come to mind for me. I remember this was probably about 7 or 8 years ago, and these are simple things, but just kind of like phrasing, kind of maybe where you were at. I remember there was a young friend of mine who had went through an emotional breakup, and she's in her early 20s, and these sort of things do happen. But I remember trying to reach out and say, hey, don't sit there and feel sorry for yourself. I know that that it hurts, that it is painful. I said, but here's something that I hope gives you some solace, at least a little bit. I said, out there in the world, there is someone who is actually going through a situation that's a lot worse than yours. Breakups can be painful, but there are a lot worse things out there. Now, what's fascinating to me about saying that was the very next day is when 9/11 happened. You could just think, wow. And so I came to work, and she says, you couldn't have been more right. I said, I didn't expect to be right on that level. And I said, well, how are you feeling now? She says, I just don't feel like that sort of implosion that I felt before. Now my passion or compassion seems to be going outside of myself. And I said, do you feel alive? And she says, yes, actually for the first time I do. And this had been going on for a couple of weeks. Now, it was just the other day I was talking with another friend of mine, and we were actually talking about our grandparents. And I said, I find what's interesting is that my grandmother had passed away about 2.5 years ago, I believe it was, to the day. and her husband of many years, and they spent a lot of time traveling. They spent a lot of time doing things together. And when he passed, basically, she had become single for about 25 years. And as we were talking about our grandparents, I said, you know, the most interesting thing, and it was sort of a sad thing to say, was it seemed like my grandmother died at that point and just lived for the next 25 years, basically existing. And you could see those stages. It's almost as though she should have or wanted to just die then. Did you feel that way at any point, or did you just kind of find yourself finding your own way through the grieving process, and what was that like for you?
I can say on both sides, I felt that way, and once in a while, this is 4 years later, I still feel that way, that I'm just kind of lost. But in the meantime, I have built a totally new life. I love my life. I enjoy my life. I've really expanded my life socially, and emotionally, mentally, you know, I had a lot to learn. I had never really been on my own. I had either been with my parents or I had been married for 20 years. So it was all a new endeavor, and for the most part, I remained open to new experiences, and which is difficult at times. In the beginning, of course, you're just kind of in this numb state, and you know, it's just like one day drags into the other. But eventually, that heaviness began to lift, and my life began to feel different. And like I said, I just love my life. But from time to time, there's still that emptiness that, you know, I wish I did have someone in my life, because when you've had that and then you don't have it, there's such a void.
I know it's interesting because you talk about finally taking even the step toward, well, perhaps maybe I should start dating, you know, having somebody in my life for maybe friendship or who knows. And you talked about how you went online and you met a gentleman named Larry. Now, this is one of those situations where it's already tough enough, but describe what had happened there.
Well, basically, the whole online dating thing, at first it felt kind of strange to even be thinking about that. I almost felt like there was a stigma attached to it. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, people are going to think I'm desperate, I'm going online. Mm-hmm. But I guess it was a way to get my feet wet. And,
and a way to stay safe when you think about it.
Yeah.
You know, because you get the opportunity to chat online and kind of keep your distance if you need to, but...
Yeah, which is what I thought it might be a good way to start. But unfortunately, having been out of dating for, I think it was like 25 years or something, everything has totally changed.
I'll bet. Yes, it has. Even the people.
Yes. So, I don't know. I had what I felt were some heartbreaking experiences, but... you know, it's stuff I needed to learn because it empowered me, and it added something to my life. As hard as it was going through these things with the different fellows I had dated, it really added to my own personal resume, my own internal resume, I like to say.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. It's interesting how you write in your book about the different experiences, because what people will take away from that is, wow, this book has conviction. It's raw. It's real. I can actually grab and relate to these things, even though I may not know who this person is. Now, what do you think about, Mary Kubler-Ross is someone who's very well known for the processes of loss.
Right.
And she talks about steps, and sometimes people think, well, so after this step, I go to this step, to this step, to this step. In your experience, have you seen people who have experienced loss, maybe like you have, or maybe not as much, or maybe even a deeper sense of that? Do you think many times they understand the grieving process, and in your experience, describe what a healthy grieving process really is?
Well, when I began my grieving process, I had no clue. I honestly had never read anything about the grief process. I really didn't know about the different stages. In looking at her books, Kubler-Ross's books now, I can see the different stages I did go through. I didn't go through it in any timeline.
Right.
Some of the stages I skipped. I didn't go through.
That just doesn't apply to me right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to inject humor instead.
And somebody said to me at one point, well, you're in this stage, and I'm like, and that was in the beginning. I didn't know what the heck they were talking about. Because again, I know Kubler-Ross, so I started reading up on it a little bit, and I'm like, yeah, maybe.
Right, exactly.
But I think
it's funny how there's a lot of psychiatrists out there all of a sudden that are available to you. It's like, well, I thought you repaired cars. What are you doing? Anyway.
But it's interesting, even though everybody has their own individual grief experience, universally, the grief experience is the same, but we all do it in our own individual way. I mean, there's that universal numbness, the pain, the heartache, but then how we deal with it is our own individual thing. A lot of times based on what kind of support we have, what kind of background, what kind of upbringing. If we have kids, I think you have a whole set of different set of issues in having children. So there's just like there's such a wealth of emotions that that can come into play, and I think I did talk to professionals because at some points I really needed that, and a lot of times it was just I talked with this one woman psychologist, and she was so wonderful. Basically, she just let me talk, and that's what I needed at the time, was just to talk and get it out. And I mean, I did go through a period where I was really angry. And I didn't even realize it. It was like, I think it was 2 years down the road. I was really angry suddenly that my husband had left. Not that he chose to get cancer and die, but I was so angry that he left and left everything in my lap. All the responsibility, all the decisions about the kids, everything. I mean, I got over it, but what I did was I accepted that, okay, I had the right to be angry. Okay, but you know what? Get over it. Move on with your life. That's the best thing you can do. As much as you're hurting, eventually you have to surface. For your own sense of being, you have to surface and you have to move ahead.
I know that even in my own experience, as well as others, when it comes to a point that whether it's a relationship loss or it's an actual loss, like it could be your parents or in your case your husband or even your own children, that it sometimes feels very difficult to get up out of bed, like you just don't even want to deal in the world, and you'd rather just sit in the home wrapped up in almost your own self-misery as though that will make you feel better. But did you feel that as you stepped out into the world that you became more active? Did you begin to feel yourself really feeling better as a result of that?
Definitely. Yeah.
Because I know you describe in your book that during the course of his illness that you'd put on about 25 pounds.
Right.
And eventually you felt, well, I need to get out and get active. You started doing cardio and different things. And that must have just started to make you feel better, because what you get an opportunity to, I believe, and this is what I've heard from people that we've had on our program, as you go out and engage in life and you begin to become active and participate, that you get that opportunity to feel those stages as you were talking about and let them sort of unravel for themselves until they center themselves into who you are authentically. Was that your experience?
Oh, yeah. And once some of that, a little bit of the pain receded, a little bit of the numbness, I'm a very active person, and I hated the fact that I had this extra weight on. So being proactive, I just decided, okay, I'm going to do something about it. And actually, that's when I started seeing my naturopathic doctor, because I wanted to make sure, because my system was just going haywire. So I knew first I had to get things in line, with my body and my system. And the thing is, what's nice about going to a naturopathic doctor, too, is it's not like a regular doctor. You go and it's a 2-hour visit, the first visit, and they want to know what's going on inside your head, not only what your body symptoms are.
Yeah.
They want to pull the guts out.
Right. I know, Elaine, it's funny because I remember my first experience was about, in the late 80s with going into, I guess, a naturopathic doctor, or a natural healing center, if you will. And I remember one of the most astounding questions I'd ever heard from a doctor, and I sat there and I almost didn't even know how to answer this, was, and this is true, this was the very first question, are you happy? Now that a doctor has never asked me that before. I had never even thought about it. And was that kind of like your experience as well?
Oh, definitely. And I mean, I kind of knew in advance that they like to get to the meat of the problem, but I mean, it was like and I'm not a person really who likes to talk about what's going on inside. I'll be the first to admit. I've gotten a lot better about it. But we're sitting there, and he kept asking me, well, you're not dating, you don't have any, how do you feel about that? And I'd answer, and he's like, well, what else comes to mind when you think about being on your own, and how are you doing with the kids? And you know, and we just got into the tiniest corners of my mind, and at first it felt not intrusive, but it's like, okay, I really have to put this stuff out here.
Right, exactly. They're stretching me out on a board like a catfish. What's going on here? Now, let's talk about your boys. Now, how are they doing, and what was the relationship with you and your boys after the passing of your husband, and sort of their own journey as well?
Well, my youngest was 11 when his father passed away, and I feel my family has always been close, but when my husband died, my youngest son, he would like hang on me. I mean, physically hang on me, and he'd be, you know, we'd be out somewhere, and he'd have his arm not tightly around me, but always around me, which is okay, but not constantly, you know.
Yeah.
And and I understood that he was kind of like, he was worried that something was going to happen to me. And he even voiced that concern a couple months after my husband died. He said, you know, what happens if you die? What's going to happen to me? You know, so I always tried to reassure him. And as far as him hanging on me, I would just, we got to this joking point where I said, you know what? I said, we have to kiss and let go. Kiss and let go. No hanging on.
Right. It's time for you to fly, young bird. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, he'd be going to a friend's house, and he'd give me like 4 or 5 kisses, and then he'd come back and he'd hug me and he'd give me another kiss, and so that's when we started, you know, kiss and let go. Okay, we're done. And then my other 2 boys, my oldest son had moved away from home, and I was incredibly worried about him because sometimes he's coming home and it's late at night, and he had accidents, and it was just like so much trauma going on, and I guess they call it acting out. And tickets and stuff like that, and that was his way, I understood, of dealing with it. But I'm constantly like, listen, you know what, this behavior, I said, I you know, it's bad enough losing Dad, but I said, the thought of losing any of my kids, car accident, whatever, I said, that would literally kill me. I said, I couldn't handle it. And I would constantly try to talk to him, and I mean, he's an adult, you know, he's 18 or so, 19. I'm just trying to let him know I'm there to support him, but he really has to think about the choices he's making. He was making some bad choices.
Yes. But
you know what? You can give your kids whatever you can give them. You can instill in them, but ultimately they're adults. It's up to them. The final decision is up to them.
Boy, don't you know I know that one.
Yeah. And my middle son, he like wanted to stay in bed all day. He was sleeping. He was going to school and he wasn't going to classes, and he wasn't showing up for work, and that was another brain drain for me. And finally, I kept talking to him, and I'm like, you know what? Finally, I got really mad, I guess, and I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let him go on like this. I said to him, if you are depressed, if you're having a problem, I said, talk to me. I said, we can go talk to, because I tried to get all my kids to go for counseling. And they were all like very adamant, no, we're not going, we're not getting in the car, we're not going. End of story. So what ultimately happened was my youngest is now 15. He'll be 16 in September, and it's incredible. He went from this little 11-year-old kid to now he's 5'10", and it's funny because he's just like my husband. He loves puttering around with his machines, his tractors, and he's up in the barn playing around with stuff, and he's got his own firewood business, and he's got his own brush cutting business with his tractor. And now my middle son is in school, and he's working. He's still at home, but he is going to school. And my oldest son recently just moved to Maryland, and in the last year and a half, he's he's still away from home, obviously, but he has improved so much. I see him. Each of my kids have like come into their own, like they're more comfortable, and I know they still, think about their dad, and that will never change. But with distance, some of the hurt has, maybe resolved itself a little bit. It's become a little bit easier for them to move on, however they feel, comfortable doing. And I'm just very happy because right now I can see that my kids have really, come into their own, and their life is happy for them again.
Now, Elaine, as your husband passed and you had your loss, did you feel a death sort of inside yourself? And if you did you start seeing life and realizing that the small things that used to bother you like crazy just no longer bothered you anymore?
Yeah, I think when you experience loss, when anyone experiences loss, you realize, why let the little stuff bother you when there are so many other important things. You try to live life a little more fully, being aware of what could happen in an instant, what you can lose.
Yeah. I know that as we've done many programs, from time to time I ask that question, and you almost hear an elation in someone's voice as though, you're right, somehow I feel like not that I was living badly or whatever, but that I feel like I'm living better. And sometimes I wish that person that I lost would come back so they could see just how different things can be about let's go out and get it now instead of being in such a routine as you might have been in before. Now, I'm curious, you wrote this book, A Journey Well Taken, Life After Loss. Why did you do that, and what do you hope that when people pick it up that they gain from reading your book?
Well, initially I wrote it actually for myself because I knew, I've always been a writer, and I hadn't been able to write anything while I was in this, I would say the first 2.5 years during my husband's illness, and then 2.5 years after his passing, I couldn't write anything. There was just nothing there. And I started doing this little journal, this little diary, and I would come home and from work, and I just jot down, and then suddenly I had like 20-some pages, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, now I feel better. It's done. Well, then I started adding to it, and I ended up with 200 pages down the road.
Oh, boy. So there was a lot in there.
Yeah. So, and I was like, okay, this is really good for me because I felt much better having put everything down on paper, and it is a very personal accounting of my life, but I felt that's what I had to do to put it out there. And then I realized that, you know what, and it kept coming to me, other widows needed to read it, other people need to read it, and I really resisted this idea for about 6 or 8 months because of the fact that it is so personal. And I talked to different friends, and they were like, well, you know what, you should put it out there. You're a writer, and other people really do need to read it. So I shopped it around to some agents, publishers, and everybody said, oh, it's a really narrow market, which I don't get because there's like 700,000 new widows every year. But,
a narrow market. This is it.
Yeah.
What are you talking about, sales, or what the hell's wrong with you?
So I said to myself, you know what?
If they were in our market, they would see how wrong their thinking was.
Right. And I said to myself, you know what? It doesn't matter. Somehow I have to put it out there because there's people that need to, and I knew it would find its way into the hands of whoever needed to read it. Mm-hmm. So basically I wrote it for myself. I wrote it for my children, which I've given them each a copy, but at some point I hope that they will read it, especially the first part, because it's about them and their dad, really. And then, I wrote it for others, and it's like I said, I always had the conviction that it will end up where it needs to be, and that's the bottom line. Whoever needs to read it, whoever needs to take the littlest piece from it, it will fall into their hands.
Well, certainly, and when you consider that maybe not all widows have a community of friends and family, maybe not like yours, some of them are just completely alone. True. And if it's just that one moment, that one opportunity, as you were talking about, where they come across this, pick it up and go, wow, you mean to tell me that I don't have to stay this way forever, that there really is life out there to go grab? That's a sense of inspiration. It's almost as You know, I remember a quote from Marianne Williamson, which is well, it was actually a quote that she rewrote from someone else into a book, but she sort of made it popular. Was she just simply said, "Be the light," because when you become the light, you automatically give permission for others to do the same, and that's certainly what your intention was with this book, was to help people to become that light as well as for others, because you don't know what gifts you're holding back from others when you're kind of wrapped up and you're just kind of holding on to yourself and I'm just going to stay here, and you need to get out and engage and realize just how precious being alive really is. And it certainly sounds like you've taken a wonderful step in that direction, putting a book out here, A Journey Well Taken. What has been the response from maybe people that you know or maybe even people that you don't know about this book?
I've had from people that I know, my mother read it, and of course my mother and my parents were here for the you know, they were helping us while my husband was sick as much as they could, and they did actually move in the last month. And my mother said to me, and we both started crying, and she said, "You know what? We were there, we knew what was going on, but to read this book, we understand so much more, you know, because you're getting it from a different perspective." And that's why I hope my kids read it. But others, like friends, they said, "You know what?" One good friend of mine said, I couldn't put it down. He said, "I started reading it," and he said, "This is for anybody that's lost somebody." He said it was just so compelling. And my sister-in-law, when she read it, I mean, I've known her since we were both 15, and she got it in the mail, and she said she went in the house. She didn't even take her coat off. She sat there for 3 hours and read the book. And she immediately called me up, and she was just like, she was so, you know, it was just incredible to hear her talk about it. And then I get emails from people I don't know, and they're like, "Oh my gosh," it's like the words were coming out of my own mouth. And they said, I've had these same thoughts, and I'm so encouraged to know. I mean, it might be somebody who's only 1 year into their grief journey, but they said, we're so encouraged to know that it does get better. Life does get some kind of normal again. So it's really encouraging to hear people say this, to know that my intention is what it's happening. It's ending up into, you know, it's getting into the right hands.
Well, Elaine, I was kind of curious, too, as they were reading the book, these people. I'll bet you they were thinking, now I understand some of the irrational behavior she was doing in such a way that actually she was more rational than we were about what we were seeing.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, the emotional up and downs, I mean, sometimes you end up in places you never expected.
Right, exactly. Well, I know that you have a website. It's a journeywelltaken.com. Now, if people go there, what will they find?
Well, I have the latest interviews, and I had recently also been interviewed by U.S. News and World Report, and there's videos, there's book trailers, you know, so you can get a little view of what the book's about. And I have links related to grief-related websites, and I also have links where you can actually buy the book through myself on Wings Press or through Barnes & Noble or Amazon. So I have different resources that people can go and, you know, go to other pages too and just check out and see what is available out on the web, because there is a lot out there. Different kinds of counseling for people that are going through, you know, bereavement. And I also have links to my blog. I blog every day. I try to blog every day about different things that are going on in my life. And I also have a link. I've written about 40 different articles since January, all related to my own experience, not only dating, but the grief process and different things like a widow's many firsts, which, I mean, some of the stuff seems trivial, like, you know, like some people have emailed me and said, well, when do I remove my wedding ring? How do you start going out socially by yourself again? And this stuff sounds so silly, really, but they were big steps in the life of a widow. Yeah.
Yeah, well, for instance, especially in a long-term relationship, you think to yourself, well, wait a minute, you know, I want to go out and maybe explore these things, but then you may have friends or family that says, don't you think it's a little too soon for that? It's like, well, why don't you let me decide that for myself? You know,
exactly.
Because, again, there is no blueprint really for something like this, and it's everybody finding their own way.
Absolutely true, yes.
Well, I'll tell you, it's for just about anybody out there. If you may know somebody who's going through a grieving process or a situation, this should be a book that people should pick up just to kind of help navigate their way and come to their own conclusions as well. And Elaine Williams, we'd like to thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Go ahead and I'll let you shoot your website out there one more time.
Thank you. It's ajourneywelltaken.com, www.ajourneywelltaken.com.
Very good. Elaine Williams, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been a pleasure.
You bet. Again, the book is A Journey Well Taken, and that's Life After Loss, and our guest joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today, Elaine Williams. Remember, you don't have to stay cocooned. There's a whole life out there to grab. And if you have had a situation where you've lost a loved one, I'm sure that if they could come back while you're sitting there cocooned, they would say, what are you waiting for? Let's get out there and let's start moving. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us today. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. Be sure to visit our website, beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50 with a 50. Also sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. That's where you'll find out about people such as Elaine Williams, and also visit our blog. I want to thank you for joining us today. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.